You manage to pick the lock flawlessly. You hear the barrel inside the cylinder unlatch as your thieves' tools slip free and the door latch begins to loosen up. You grab a hold of the handle, throw it open, and there before you are 12 orcs silently standing there, spears in hand, ready to attack. Roll for initiative? It's like at this point, after a great description and how you've managed to get into a room and describe the contents of the room or the smell of the air, I tell you to stop, roll dice, add numbers, and give me the order that they come in. It takes the flow of combat right down the drain, and we've all heard of this bottleneck before. So today, we're going to be talking about ways to potentially improve upon this and whether or not we like initiative or don't like initiative. Hang out. We're going to be back with more. Hey everybody, welcome to iCast Guidance, your Dungeons & Dragons podcast, where every week, Garrett and I take a ruler mechanic in the game of D&D that's lackluster or needs improvement, and we offer you advice on how to make your game around that rule more interesting or more fun. So, sharpen up those daggers, we're getting started right now. Oh my God, did you see the Cosmere Kickstarter, the end of the Cosmere Kickstarter campaign?
Yeah, we purchased the Cosmere RPG within the last hour. So yeah, I saw the end.
Oh my God.
It ended somewhere around, I think, 4.7 million, 4.8 million. 14. Sorry, 14.
Yeah.
I knew there was a 4 in there.
Yeah. God, man. And so you picked it up.
Yes.
I'm excited.
Yes. We are going to be playing that when it comes out. I'm excited for it.
That's fantastic. How you doing, man?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited for today's discussion. A lot has gone on this week. So first of all, school has started back up. So I am prepping Classroom for 3D design, and I'm printing stuff, testing all the printers out. Mm-hmm. So I'm getting back into creating our miniatures, just as I love them as test prints, right? You know, just to make sure everything's calibrated and ready to go. Once the students start pumping their work through there, I got no room.
Yeah.
But
you can't use that stuff then.
No, but it's nice. So we got a good discussion on the at bat here that we're going to talk about today with initiative.
Yes.
And how many issues we've had with that, how many solutions we've tried to come up with. We've looked at other games, and we got a lot going on here. So I'm excited.
Is it broken? Can we make it better?
Is it? I don't. You know, this is the thing I go back and forth about. Okay, so we're gonna bring in, just so you guys that are listening know, we're gonna bring in a couple of other games into this that have sort of tried to look at or tackle or change the initiative system, because I think they're really relevant.
Yeah.
And there are times when I feel like initiative should be out. And then there are times where, no, initiative's beautiful. Let's work with it. So I'm conflicted. I'm hoping our talk today can help me through this a little bit.
Yeah, we've tried a couple of different things. So we have a little experience in this, for sure.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, to me, initiative functions in a way as a kind of balancing act with the role play side of the game. Everybody's always like, no, initiative slows it down. It interrupts it. And you made a very good point when we first started talking about this subject, which we'll bring up in a little bit. But, I feel like balance needs to be brought to the game. So for whatever that's worth.
Well, like you were saying, it is a game.
Yeah.
It needs to have, in a point, it needs to have something there.
Right. So can I jump into that real quick? All right. So, let's do rules as written.
Okay.
Because we always do rules as written first.
Yeah. You know, we come from this as a primarily a 5e
approach.
Focus approach.
Yeah.
So, rules is written, 5e, you enter a combat, you roll your dexterity check, and you take a list of initiative. The GM takes a list of initiative from the players and the monsters. The player's handbook says that the DM should group together like-minded or like creatures. like into a horde of skeletons, or,
Right.
So that should be under one initiative instead of complicating 15 skeletons into a separate initiative order. That would be insane.
Right.
And then any tiebreakers are usually taken either by the DM's discretion on either a monster or you focus on your dexterity score.
Right.
And players, if they tie in dexterity score, it's usually a roll off. Right. That's how the rules in the book,
Right.
put it out there.
Right. And so this is the part where I'm going to let you describe it, because you talked about walking into that dragon's lair. You're finally at the boss battle. Repeat that.
In my mind, so you're coming as a player. We're walking through a dragon's lair. We've been leading up to this. It might have even been a couple of sessions. We are trying to hunt down this dragon. The GM is in the middle of describing. We see the dragon. He is in the middle of describing exactly what we see. This dragon sees us coming. It is, rearing up to about to, hit us with a breath weapon or whatever. And he stops and says, roll for initiative.
Right at the moment of tension.
Now, we got 6 players at the table. We've got the GM. Every player is going to roll their die, and then we're going to give off our numbers to the GM. He's going to write out a list of the order. We just wasted 2 minutes. Or more, because, some players have a hard time adding up a couple of numbers. But we just spent multiple minutes, and the suspense is now broken.
Sure. So
we just lost it.
Exactly. So I'm, on that note, I'll just run over to Daggerheart, the Darrington Press Critical Role version of the TTRPG. Decides to eliminate initiative. And this is in the spirit of the fiction. This is in the spirit of maintaining the story.
Daggerheart focuses more around the storytelling.
Right.
The role play.
Right.
And we experienced it. We play tested it a little bit, couple of one shots. And when you completely go away from that numbered structure of initiative and you do a free form, coming from the player side, we had a hard time with it. Quite a few of our players around the table were essentially felt sidelines, maybe, because it's like you don't want to step on someone else's toes and, someone's about to attack, but like they beat you to talking and you don't want to, talk over them and be like, well, I want to do this. And you don't want to have that argument at your table. But I felt like some players, it was like, you've got 4 players waiting to say what they want to do because there is no structure to it at all. You lose that, I guess, more crunchy gameplay of it.
Right. But to be fair to Darrington Press, they changed a couple of things.
They did.
And so they brought in the notion of utilizing action tokens and that there's a limited number of things a player can do.
Yes.
And that you're not going to replace those action tokens until everyone at the table has had a chance to perform the move.
They definitely fixed on it,
right.
or changed on it.
Right. So knowing that, so we've got the poles of existence here. We've got this notion of the 5E. Let's roll specific numbers, create a turn order, and then we're going to go in that turn order, thus slowing things down into a turn-by-turn sequence. Or the Darrington Press Daggerheart version of let's just run with it. What do you do? And everybody's at the table shouting out what they want to do next, which I love both of those poles. I'd like to take it back in history a little bit and talk about this notion of, because we said it's a game, and I want to bring in the history of gaming a little bit into initiative and talk about one of the things I think about when it comes to initiative. And, this could be a bit of an eye roller for some people, but I love this approach. All right.
Here comes the Todd tangent.
Here comes the Todd tangent.
But we like these.
All right. I hope we like
these.
We hope. I hope. All right, so I want to go all the way back to the oldest game ever created, and that is Chaturanga, or chess, right? It's one of the oldest played games on Earth, okay? Now, anybody who's played chess before knows that it's basically 2 people, one against the other, in a game of strategy with pieces on a board, moving about the board in a very, very analytical, and keyword there, analytical scenario. Now, chess represents two warring sides. Okay. You've got two basically armies that are against one another, and you are trying to pin down the king on the other side to win the game. So we've got analysis, we've got strategy, and we have a clear winner. Okay. Unless, of course, there's a stalemate, but that's, okay. So, okay, let's fast forward to where that war game got a little bit more advanced. And in the 16 and 1700s, you see the birth of early war games where soldiers, little physical figures on a field, are now sort of moving about. And it's more than just the 32 pieces on a chessboard. It's now entire armies. There could be battle maps and terrain. And it becomes more organized as we get into the 1800s. In the 1900s, you see the birth, H.G. Wells created a book called Little Wars, which was for his kids. And it was detailing this notion of let's have a war on the carpet with little buildings that are made out of paper and these little spring-loaded guns that fire projectiles. And so again, chess becomes more complicated and the rule sets really start to develop, especially into the mid-1900s, into the mid-century area. And we see associations and clubs that center on these notions of war games, right? Now, we know in the history of Dungeons and Dragons, if we go all the way back to Gygax, sort of implementing a little bit more of a complicated system, he was borrowing from those very rule sets. And as a matter of fact, there were certain books around those. And we're going to do a podcast on the history of wargaming. So I'm not going to get into that too much here because I don't want to spoil that. But ultimately, what you wind up with is Dungeons and Dragons is birthed out of that wargaming movement. Out of a movement that was entirely based around analysis, strategy, and a winner. Okay, so where do we land? Well, role-playing starts to come in later, right? We always think of D&D as a game about storytelling, but D&D was really a game about wargaming in a much more sophisticated and medieval fashion. Yeah. Right? Okay, so don't get me wrong, I'm a complete champion of role-playing, and it's one of my favorite parts of the game. But what I see is this notion that initiative and role play are sort of like the art and science. Reverse that. The initiative is the science and role play is the art of the game blended together. So in a lot of ways, I feel like initiative is the balance to the role play of the game. Darrington Press and Daggerheart sort of say, well, we're more about fluidity and flow and maintaining the theater of the mind, which I absolutely see, but let's get rid of initiative. I'm like, and I'll do my whole thing about, I'm going to connect this to another art form in a minute, once you've had enough of my talking for a few seconds, but in a few minutes, I want to bring this into another art form. But for me right now, it's about balance. So
I wasn't completely against the Daggerheart system.
Right.
I did like it doesn't break it because you can just run right into it. Run right into the scenario, run right into the battle without stopping and rolling initiative. So that's, I think why we're looking at this is how do you not clog up or delay the gameplay?
Right.
That's, I guess, where we could get into some homebrew options.
Agreed.
And that's what we try and do here is how do we make it better? Right. How do we change this?
Right.
Alter the rules. And I mean, one of the ones that really hits home, if you don't want to delay the gameplay, and we've tried this, I think, once at our table, and I'd like to maybe circle back to it, but roll initiative at the start of your session and keep track of it. You sit down at the table, GM has your players just roll initiative. We're not going into a battle yet, but keep track of the numbers so that when a battle happens, the GM could just look at you and say, you're up.
Well, and this is beautiful and one of the things I love most about this is the words roll for initiative signify combat.
Yes.
And so everybody says, oh, we're going into battle. That means on my turn, I'm going to draw my sword and fight or attack. However, how many times has a GM out there been frustrated with the fact that the players did not try to talk, negotiate,
diffuse?
Yeah. Not that I'm against combat. I freaking love combat, but there have been times in my game when I'm running a game that a key NPC is nested in that scenario. And 5 minutes later, it's a slaughterhouse.
I think that just comes from the murder hobos at the table, per se. I mean,
maybe a little bit.
I think maybe sometimes in our games, we just, because we enjoy the role play, we enjoy the storytelling. Maybe there's a little lack of combat. So when there is a scenario for combat, it's just like kill everything.
Yeah, jump right in and just destroy.
I think that's just, you know, sometimes how the table plays.
Well, if I'm a GM and I have done this system where we sat down at the table, we're done with snacks, we're ready to begin. I'm like, okay, everybody, let's start. Everybody roll for initiative. And I write down that order. And then an hour goes by before there's actually an encounter. So much to the point that the players have forgotten the initiative order altogether. And I describe, you're walking into town and you see a character who seems to be dressed in a hooded cloak standing against the corner of a building. He is sharpening a stick with a dagger and just kind of like looking down at his work. And every once in a while, he glances up at the party walking by. And as you approach, he stops, dagger on wood, halfway through the cut curl, about to fall off onto the street. And he just stares at you. And I say, Garret, or I say, Branmorn, what do you want to do? Because you were at the top of that initiative order. And now I'm not telling you it's combat time. I'm just saying to you specifically, it's your turn.
Because if you're not using those words, roll for initiative. Because if you roll for initiative, this dude's, you know, mad dogging me down the road. I'm probably going to attack.
Right.
Most likely.
Right.
But if you just give me the option, what do you want to do? I would have probably forgotten about the initiative order, like you said.
Yeah.
So it's a different way to look at it.
Yeah. And in my mind as GM, we've gone into turn sequence now. And I'm like, okay, let's measure this out. And I'm also a big fan, and this is a whole different subject, but I'm also a big fan of a combat timer, right?
Yeah.
So if in my mind we're in turn by turn combat sequence, but we've taken out the signifier roll for initiative, and I say to you, what do you want to do? Well, if 6 seconds evaporates,
most 30, likely you're going to say, what do you want to do? And I'm just going to sit there for, you know, a period of time and be like, I'm probably going to look at a couple of my other party members. And
I, as GM at that point, could probably either do one of two things. I could assume either A, there's nothing that you want to do. Therefore, I would move to the next person in the list. Or maybe I'll let you hold an action. Even though you didn't state it, I might say, you know, because let's say the second person in the initiative lineup is our murder hobo. And they're like, I'm going to walk right up to this guy and I'm going to pull out my rapier. I'm going to put it up to his neck and be like, what the fuck is your problem, man? Right?
There we go.
Well, now back to you.
Now it kicks off.
Yeah, back to you. And I'm like, sure you don't want to do anything?
I don't know if we've had that exact scenario, but
no, I just made that up. I just pulled that out of nowhere. But that's the point, is that now all of a sudden the storyline is maintained. The flow is maintained.
And you're keeping those numbers in there to keep the structure of initiative.
Correct.
And that's what I think it should be.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
You then have it broken down into different turns, and you're keeping track of that, but you didn't delay the story at all.
Right. Well, you know, and we talked a little bit about Daggerheart. We brought that in. I want to bring in another one, and that's one I just picked up, Shadow Dark, which was the big winner from the Arcane Library at the Ennies. And I've been reading through that book because I am I'm a Dungeons & Dragons 1E fan. So the art in this book is exquisite, number one. Number two, the system is very sort of dungeon crawl, old school. There's 4 classes in this book, right? And one of the things this system does is it returns to, or doesn't return to, but it simplifies it. It's basically that. The dungeon master is going to have everybody roll for initiative at the beginning of the game, and that's the turn order in any sequence in the game. And that's, I'm not going to say this game is role play heavy. I don't think it is. But it does simplify the flow of turn order in the game. So it's very thoughtful in that regard.
I saw, that's interesting, is when you mentioned this to me, I asked, is it per session or is it per the game? And I even looked in the book. It's per the game. Like, I don't know how long a game actually goes in this. Like, is it like a long play campaign type thing?
I haven't gotten to a point where it says specifically what it wants to do there, but they have several zines that are their adventure modules, and it can absolutely be adapted to homebrew. I think you could do it any way you want it.
And I mean, also you could put a little twist on that where every maybe couple sessions you change it up.
Right.
Because like, you know, if you're the rogue and you rolled shitty and you're in last place, it's going to feel kind of crummy if that's your entire gameplay of this whole game.
Sure. I am sure there are issues in here.
Yeah. But, you know, I saw when looking up homebrew ideas for this, I saw a couple of different things like that where they brought up just maybe using just your dex score and don't even roll for it. Just keep it simplified to take the dice out of it. Just use your dex score in your party. But that then brings up the same, you know, side effect that I just said. You might have like your paladin, the dump dexterity. They're always going to go last.
Right.
And they're going to feel crappy about it because it's like they don't have that chance to possibly roll high, get themselves out there in the beginning. So that, you know, that aspect of looking at it like that, maybe a little broken.
Well, I think one of the beautiful things about the game is the notion of when you have a lot of variety, you have a lot of possibility. And so it seems like the choices are endless. And so if the paladin is going to go last all the time, it's going to get stale quickly.
Yeah.
So while some of these things do in good faith attempt to help that problematic element, they fall down in other areas.
Yeah.
Right. I will say that if I'm not mistaken, and I am still rusty on the rules for Shadow Dark, I am learning them. So this could be a flawed statement I'm about to make. But if I'm not mistaken, players level up at the end of every session.
Oh.
And so if that's the case, and you're going for, 10 sessions is a long time to play, especially if you're a dungeon crawl.
Yeah, this is a dungeon crawl type thing.
Yeah, not exclusively.
Yeah.
The Shadow Dark, which is the world that this takes place in. And this is another thing I love about this game. I don't want to get too much. I'm going to talk about this game as a separate podcast.
Yeah.
But the world is dark and no one has dark vision. And everybody has to rely on the use of a torch. And a torch is a game mechanic timer in this game.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden you're really relying on light, artificial light, which is awesome. But it's simple. It is so simple. And that's one of the things I love about this game. So their initiative, I'm going to say that this notion of initiative rolled once at the beginning of the game to simplify things. If this game is it, and I feel like this game might be it, I'm down with that. I'm down with trying until it's boring.
I'm down with trying it.
Yeah.
We want to try other TTRPGs.
Well,
sure.
We were talking about, in the beginning of this, we were having a quick discussion about Cosmere. And you were saying you looked into initiative in Cosmere.
So I was going to bring this up. In the Cosmere RPG, and I'm excited to try this out. They have a whole different look on it. And maybe other TTRPGs might have a system like this, but they use an action economy where you have 2 or 3 actions that you can take in your turn, which would be moving, attacking, or etc. But to set initiative when a battle occurs, the GM asks you, do you want to take a fast turn or a slow turn?
Ooh.
A fast turn is going to get you out there first, but you will only have 2 actions. So you might only be able to move and attack. And there's other things in this where there's all kinds of other actions, and the rule set hasn't 100% come out, but there's other actions in there. And the enemies also get to choose to act fast or slow. And if you take a slow turn, you get 3 actions. So you might be able to set yourself up better in a certain scenario by taking a slow turn. So it uses an action economy based on how fast or slow you want to react.
That's kind of interesting. And I just want to talk to our listeners out there for a second. We talk about this being a Dungeons & Dragons podcast, and here we are talking about Daggerheart, Shadow Dark, and Cosmere. To be clear, we bring these other games into the discussion to look at how they utilize something we typically utilize in Dungeons & Dragons, and how can we alter, or borrow from some of these other systems to make our D&D game better, which is the point of a lot of what we do. Now, in that scenario you're talking about with Cosmere, I'm immediately like, well, here we are trying to simplify things. That seems, well, first of all, my love of detail and that kind of deep dive, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I want to try this out with with that. But at the same time, that seems like another complicated layer.
Yeah. No, you might be right on that, where it is another complicated layer, and they do not. You then have to pretty much rely on the party. If you have 3 people that want to go fast, You then have to rely on the party to choose who's essentially going first. Maybe you could add a roll into that, but I don't know if the rules have that set up or not.
Yeah. Well, okay. So some of you probably don't know, Cosmere is the role-playing game that just finished its Kickstarter campaign that focuses on the Brandon Sanderson Mistborn Stormlight Archive universe. And it just finished the Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. The materials are still not going to come out for quite some time.
Yeah, it's going to be a while.
Yeah, but knowing Brandon Sanderson and the sheer volume of material that exists in those worlds, it's going to be good.
Mm-hmm. We've got about a year until we get our physical copies. PDFs will come out before that. I think there are ways to play right now with, play testing and character generators and stuff online. But the physical stuff will take a year to come out. And, we've got some time.
Yeah, I love Kickstarters.
Yes.
I love the whole economy that's created for creativity in general, but man. All right, we're going to take a quick break right here for a few words, and then we're going to come back and finish this discussion on initiative. We got a few more things to talk about, which I'm excited to tell you about, but let's just take a quick break and we'll be back in a moment. Hey, everybody, I just wanted to reach out for a minute and tell you how much we love what we do. First of all, Wither and Bloom Studios loves making Dungeons and Dragons content. And all of us here, and there's quite a few of us, we all have different angles that we want to take this from. This means that we can provide for you a really diverse channel with lots of different content. And you probably know that already, but I just wanted to throw that out there to you. Now, Garret and I on iCast Guidance work really hard at developing these conversations and possibly even collaborating with others. And we're looking to you for a little bit of support. Now, we have set up a Patreon at patreon.com/Wither and Bloom Studios. If you head over there, you can check out what we've got available. And for the simple price of like a cup of coffee per month, you can help us continue to make this material happen. We offer a whole bunch of great perks, so we're excited to get those to you. Those things include like monthly newsletters, downloadable PDF homebrew content that you can play in your game, Discord roles, shout outs, all kinds of stuff. So we're asking if you would come along for the ride. Also, when it comes to monetization on these channels and these types of things, it's hard. It's really hard to do. Oftentimes you think, well, if you just hit it in terms of views, you're just going to go buy a yacht. Well, number one, we could give a shit about a yacht. We don't really want that. But number two, it's the type of thing that when other advertisers get into your space, they oftentimes can tell you what they want, and we don't want that. We'd rather be supported by you guys, the D&D community. We don't want a bunch of corporate people, kind of making decisions about what we make our content about. So help us out. And the more you do, the more we're going to be able to bring you. And I'm looking forward to actually making a whole bunch more of this downloadable content for you guys. So go over to patreon.com/Wither and Bloom Studios and grab yourself a membership, and then jump into the Discord and say hi and tell us what's going on and tell us what you want to see. We can't wait to sort of get aligned with you guys a little bit better and hearing about what you want us to make. So let's get back to this topic for today, and we will be talking to you soon. Thank you. All right. So now, we went off on that break for a second, and all I could think about was this notion that, God, we don't get the Cosmere game for a year.
Nope. That
hurts.
I purchased it and I'm like, I want to play this now. I did a lot of research and looking into it, and I knew I was going to purchase it regardless. I want to do it for the channel. I want to play test it, but to wait a year, it's just, and that's just for half the Kickstarter. The second half, first is, Stormlight Archive. Second is Mistborn. Mistborn is in 2026. So that's 2 years out for those book sets.
Yeah.
So yeah, Kickstarters, like you said, love the economy behind them. Love the idea of them. But I also backed a DICE Kickstarter, I don't know, 2.5, 3 years ago. And I still have yet to receive my product. That company is failing.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah, we're not going to go into that. But, but behind this Kickstarter, it was the biggest RPG ever.
Yeah, I know.
On Kickstarter.
I know.
It's insane. But
Yeah. That's actually one of my favorite things to look at with Kickstarters. Is like, how much did they want and how much did they get? And I'm like, oh my God. And I'll be honest, I've had a number of ideas for Kickstarters in some of the things that I've developed. And I'm like a little bit reluctant to ever pull the trigger on the first one. Because once you do one, that's where you
expect more.
That's where you tap all your friends, right? And they'll all support you and you're probably going to do okay.
Yep.
But then you don't do another Kickstarter 3 months later where you're like, hey, come support my next one. Because people are like, no. All right. So we got a couple other things we want to talk about here.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm curious about is let's bring it back into D&D for a second, because we're 5e players, but 5e is about to go, I don't know, away.
Yeah, we got on a little bit of a tangent there.
Yeah, but D&D 5e is now, I'm going to say, an endangered species, because we know that Wizards of the Coast is about to drop the 2024 books, and that there's rumors flying everywhere about what's going to be available on your D&D Beyond character sheet, et cetera, et cetera. And you know, I still haven't gotten the books. I don't know what's going to happen with Initiative and if they've even changed anything about it at all.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure if they changed anything on Initiative there. Yeah, I think this new system, I think they're referring to it as 5.5.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be totally honest, I don't think that D&D proclaims to be perfecting this game. I know that they're making some changes. They're prickly to some people. Some people are embracing things. But we can always play our own game.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's never going to fail. I mean, I'm a little miffed about the fact that I'm probably going to have to drop a chunk of money. But then I justify that a little bit to some degree with, all right, you know, in any given subscription system, not that D&D was ever a subscription system, but you got to pay your due. And this is the train they're trying to ride. And am I a fan of Hasbro for doing that?
I mean, you didn't have a subscription system per se back in the day, but you did have to buy modules. So it's essentially the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just the fact that if you want a physical copy and a digital copy, that's, you know,
right.
But we're going, that's tangent.
Yeah, that's tangent.
We don't need to discuss that.
So, you know, I want to kind of like, I'm going to get a little weird again for a second about this. Cause let's bring it back to Initiative for a second. All right. Because really, at the end of the day, this conversation revolves around Initiative and Initiative as a sort of bottleneck in the flow of the game, right? And so my first thought was, well, this is the analysis part, right? This is where analytical strategy comes into play. We've got to slow it down and see how this unfolds, which is antithetical to the notion that combat's fast, right? We know that turn-by-turn sequences, it's 6 seconds long. And if it's 3 rounds of combat, well, this whole thing that took us an hour and a half to do at the table was in fact 18 seconds. Feels out of whack, right? Okay. But earlier I talked about this notion of how chess led to wargaming, led to Dungeons and Dragons, led to role play. And so we evolved out of the sort of cold, analytical feel of the chessboard, which I love, by the way, into this role play, theater of the mind, narrative heavy art form. So we went from what was essentially analysis into what was expression. And this reminds me of something, and this is where it gets weird, but this reminds me of jazz as an art form. Jazz is, you know, and first of all, jazz is one of the few truly American art forms on the planet. We invented jazz, okay? This is something I think that is truly American. Now, am I going to go into this whole diatribe about patriotism? No, but as a culture, I want to figure out why this fits us so well. And here we are struggling with this. Let me talk about jazz for a second, real quick. So with jazz, if you're not a jazz listener, and I get that, a jazz musician is going to usually start out with some kind of tune that follows a certain set of rules, okay? And within those rules, maybe we have something familiar, okay? So let's look at John Coltrane's My Favorite Things. Well, we start out with the notion of that song starts being played out on the saxophone by Coltrane, and we recognize that tune, okay? So that fits a certain set of rules and standards, all right? And then all of a sudden, Coltrane breaks off into this expression, and all of a sudden things kind of get wild. Now, don't get me wrong. underneath all of that sort of chaos, and it's not chaos, it's very structured, but underneath all of that, the rules still exist. But now he's flowing with this expression and he's staying in the same key or maybe making key shifts at proper times. So what it is a blend of the analysis and the expressionistic, which is the same turn this game took at the same time that Coltrane and Miles Davis and these guys were in the early 70s. And these guys, like, look at Miles Davis all of a sudden starts to get like really fucking weird with Bitches Brew. He's going on an acid trip. And what's he doing? Well, he's really finding the expressionistic aspects of a music form that also has a very heavy analytical component. And what's happening with our game? Dungeons and Dragons is starting to now build into this expressionistic element to something that was highly analytical. What happened to us as a culture that caused a lot of our iconic cultural things, music, games, storytelling, all start to now move into this narrative. We're telling the stories of ourselves, and it's really freaking interesting. I don't know. And yeah, how does this relate to initiative? Well, initiative is that thing that we claim slows down the game, but I'm going to argue it is absolutely necessary as part of the underpinnings to the history of the game.
Okay. All right. I kind of get where you're going there.
And that's my weird moment for the podcast.
If going back to the 16th century with chess, wasn't, but yeah, I get it.
I want to weave a thread through the oldest game on Earth all the way up to 17th century wargaming to the 1950s and jazz. If I could make that really stick, I think that's good. That's good. Tell us what you think. Get into the comments section on this. I'm not sure what your platform of choice out there is to all the listeners, but am I nuts? I mean,
should we take a poll?
Yeah, you want me to put a poll up on YouTube? Is Todd out of his mind and should he just go back to his day job?
But hey, we're having fun, right?
Well, we are, yeah. And I love those cross threads. Yeah. I love them. Okay, so have we found any other viable alternatives to the initiative rules?
So I don't, in our pre-discussion, I don't remember exactly how we got on it, but you described a moment, and I think it was on the heels of not breaking the narrative, but you described a moment of a player running across that room, sliding into an attack and slicing at the enemy's legs.
Yeah.
And this kind of goes on the heels of bringing up another rule that I found. And it's a Pathfinder 2nd edition rule that they have an option to use other skills and attributes for initiative, where, say in that scenario where you slide across the room.
Well, let's go back to the dragon for a second.
Yes.
Let's open the scene up. You finally open the door in whatever it is, wherever it is you are. You open the door, and there before you is the cavern with the dragon's hoard, and we've encountered the boss at the end of this.
So, I mean, we were talking about, with the dragon, let's say the rogue maybe wants to sneak around the side, flank, and attack the dragon while the rest of the party maybe distracts, goes head on.
Perfect.
Maybe in that scenario, the GM says to the rogue, use your stealth modifier as your initiative bonus, because maybe that rogue, it's going to get then a bump. Maybe will be a lot higher in the initiative order because they're using a skill to roll for initiative.
Right.
And then going back to the scenario of someone sliding, trying to slice, at the legs.
Right.
Maybe use your acrobatics.
Right.
As your initiative bonus.
Yes. So what I love about this is if we can agree that in any Dungeons and Dragons campaign, we know that combat could happen at any time. And our characters are probably poised, always ready for something to unfold, but in their comfort zone or utilizing their highest attribute. So in the case of the rogue, sure, dexterity or stealth, even better because they're proficient and, on and on and on.
Yeah.
Okay, I like this. And then I brought up, well, sure, but a surprise attack will always sort of be... I brought this up and then I negated it. I took it back. And that's this. A surprise attack on the part of an enemy towards the party will always sort of be met by a reaction from the party. And that reaction is often dexterity based, or I said always dexterity based.
Yeah, usually. Yeah, you've got to... It is. It is. In the rules, how it's set up, it is dexterity based.
Right. So in that scenario, it's sort of like, yeah, so if the wizard who dumped dexterity has got a dexterity of 8, all of a sudden is able to use intelligence to react to this scare, that to me seems unreasonable. But then I think I walked that one back a little bit.
I think you did, because we brought up, this was the idea of opening the door to a scenario. If we know there's an enemy on the other side of that door, look at it in different ways. The barbarian, he's just want to get it. He gonna want to get in there, smash something. He's gonna use strength in his idea, more or less.
Right.
The wizard is gonna think about it. He's gonna use intelligence. Right. How can I set myself up? Because that wizard doesn't want to get blasted by the volley of arrows that's gonna come at that door. You gotta think about it more. So intelligence would be definitely the higher attribute that character would use.
Sure. And this goes back again to somebody always walking through a situation armed with their most comfortable and best attributes. I love this. I almost wonder if we were to have an initiative roll off at the beginning of the session. So that's the first homebrew rule. And that's modified by allowing everyone to utilize whatever stat they want to roll that. Now, of course, that's going to be an initiative stack that's like, I rolled a 28, I rolled a 22, I rolled a 19. Everybody's going to be up above the 13 mark. That's fair. I'd say, well, let's bring that in for the monsters as well.
I was just going to say the only thing, because you're mentioning, yes, that might put some scores very high in the order. Because if you have a rogue that's expertised in stealth, their modifier might be plus 13. We've seen this before.
Yep.
Their initiative order is going to be insane.
Right.
But you can't use that to completely defeat the enemy initiative also. So you got to have some way to counteract that.
Well, yeah, because let's say it's a bard and the bard has, I'm trying to remember what the bard uses that they can't roll below a 10.
Yeah, rogues have it. It's unreliable talent or something like that.
Yeah. It basically what it means is that bard's initiative roll, if they're able to use that skill, is going to be above 25 every time, or just absolutely bonkers every time. Yeah. All right, so that doesn't really work for the full game 1 initiative roll scenario, I would say.
Yeah, maybe not. But on scenario by scenario, I think it's a different way to look at it. That your lower dexterity players, if they have a way to actually narratively bring in a way to react, I think it's viable. I like it.
Okay, well, listen, I think number one, I'm going to be working on our sort of play-by-play playable downloadable PDF around the notion of initiative. It's probably not going to be as robust as the one I made for Critical Strikes, which, by the way, you guys, the Critical Strikes PDF that I developed based on our earlier podcast actually looks really good. There's a rollable table on there. So you roll a natural 20, you dig into that rollable table. It's like, okay, how are we going to treat this natural 20? What are we going to do? And it's randomized, and it's actually really cool. So the one we're going to do for initiative, we're going to do it. We're going to get it up onto our Patreon site, which is still sitting dormant. We're not inviting you there yet. It's coming. It is coming. As a matter of fact, probably by the next episode, we'll have it available to you. A lot of exciting things coming on that. We've got a newsletter. We've got downloadable stuff. So I'm excited for that. This conversation around initiative, though, I think needs to go on. I'm curious about, as we figure out these systems in new games, I want to revisit this one.
Yeah, I agree. I think, there's a lot of options out there, but what's really the best one?
Right.
Or maybe there isn't one best one.
Right. Again, just like with critical hits. Yeah. This might be a situation where the GM, as a flavor added to a campaign, can bring different modes depending on the context.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, I had fun talking today.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to next week's conversation. We have some really cool guests lined up for the show coming up. So we are going to be doing some collaboratives we're excited about. So definitely stay tuned for those. Garret, good talking to you today.
Yeah, it was good.
All right. We'll talk to you all soon. Thank you guys for listening.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. iCast Guidance is produced by Todd Lambrix and Garret Brennan. Head over to YouTube, where we can be found at Wither and Bloom Studios, where you can see the production of this podcast every Sunday morning live at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're looking forward to seeing you there. Take care.